A dog brought its owner a human arm. That's how police found out a teenage girl had been dead for 6 weeks, her body arranged on a cliff, surrounded by objects that made investigators believe they were looking at a ritual killing. 10 armed people walked into a widow's home in Belfast, pulled her away from her 10 children in front of them, and she was never seen alive again. For over 30 years, an entire community knew what happened to her. Nobody said a word. A bookkeeper started asking questions about missing money. Weeks later, she was found dead in the bay. The people she worked for never faced any consequences, and a 17-year-old gravedigger confessed within hours of a woman being attacked in a cemetery. He spent over 2 decades in prison for it, while evidence built up suggesting they'd had the wrong person the entire time. Those 4 cases are coming up in this video. So are 43 others, every one of them from the 1970s. Every one of them still unsolved. No DNA databases, no cell phone records, no security cameras on every corner, just detectives working with paper files and whatever they could get someone to say out loud. Some of these cases you'll recognize, most of them you won't, because they never got the coverage they deserved. They don't get solved just because time passes. They get solved when people keep asking about them. So share this video, tell us in the comments which case you want us to go deeper on. That's what actually helps. Subscribe so you're here when one of these finally gets solved. A teenage employee pulls into the parking lot of the burger chef where he works. He's not on shift tonight, he's just stopping by to see if his coworkers need help closing up. The restaurant closes at 11, it's after midnight now and the lights are still on. He walks around back. The door that should be locked this time of night is standing open. Inside, the restaurant is empty. Not closed for the night empty. Abandoned mid-shift empty. The cash register drawers aren't in the register. They're sitting on the floor. 4 people were supposed to be closing tonight. Jane Freet, 20 years old, Ruth Shelton, 17, Mark Flemons, 16, Daniel Davis, 16. All 4 are gone. He calls the police. The manager arrives and counts the register. $581 missing. For a few hours, that's the story everyone wants to believe. 4 kids took the cash and ran off for the night. Except 2 coats are still hanging by the door. 2 purses are sitting untouched. No teenager plans a joyride and leaves her purse behind. Nobody pushes hard enough on that question that night. The restaurant stays open the next morning. No crime scene tape, no fingerprint kits, no photographs taken of the scene as it was found. Customers walk in and order breakfast in the same room where 4 people had vanished hours earlier. Whatever evidence existed in that restaurant is gone before anyone treats it like a crime scene. 2 days later, in a wooded field in neighboring Johnson County, all 4 are found. The details investigators uncovered were specific, and they mattered. 2 of the victims had been shot execution style. A third had been stabbed. The 4th had been beaten and left to die at the bottom of a hill, where he asphyxiated on his own blood. One investigator would later say that if that 4th victim had simply fallen the other direction, they might have had a survivor, a witness who could have named who did this. 2 teenagers reported seeing 2 unfamiliar men near the restaurant that night. Beyond that, investigators had almost nothing to work with. No physical evidence, no fingerprints, no photographs of the original scene. The case sat cold for decades, worked in the spare hours of whichever detective could be spared for it. In 1998, it landed on the desk of one Indiana State Police sergeant who spent the next 19 years quietly building his own theory of the crime, that it was tied to a string of armed robberies hitting businesses across the region that same year, including another burger chef location. It's a theory he's held onto for decades. It's never led to an arrest, and it was never anything more than his own conclusion, not an official determination by Indiana State Police. In 2018, on the 40th anniversary of the murders, investigators went public again. They released a photograph of a suspected murder weapon and announced plans to run existing evidence through DNA testing and emerging technology, hoping something originally missed could finally be recovered. Since that announcement, no new forensic breakthrough has been confirmed. The case has never stopped generating public interest. A true crime book was published on it. Podcasters investigating the murders eventually tracked down the original FBI case file, uncovering first-hand statements taken in the immediate aftermath, details that had never been public before. In 2024, a feature film dramatizing the case was released in theaters and later on streaming. None of it has produced an arrest. 4 teenagers went to work on a Friday night in 1978. None of them made it home. Indiana State Police still list all 4 names on their active cold case files today, and they're still asking the public for anything. A memory, a name, a detail that never sat right with someone, all these years later. 2 girls, Maureen Sterling, 12, and Yvonne Weber, 13, both students at the same middle school, get dropped off at an ice rink in downtown Santa Rosa around 7:30 in the evening. Around 9 p.m., they disappear. Almost 11 months pass before anyone finds them. Their remains discovered off Franz Valley Road, at the bottom of an embankment, too decomposed by then to determine much beyond how they died. They wouldn't be the last. Over the following year, at least 5 more young women and girls vanish across the same stretch of Sonoma County. Kim Allen, 19, Lori Cursa, Jeanette Kamahele, 20, last seen getting into a car at a highway on-ramp in Cotati while trying to hitch a ride to class. Teresa Walsh, 23, Carolyn Davis, just 14. Every one of them was last seen hitchhiking. Every one of them was found nude, or never found at all. And every one of them was left in nearly the same kind of place. A rural embankment, a creek bed, somewhere off a narrow county road, far from where they disappeared. The crime scenes themselves, wherever these girls were actually killed, were never found. Only the dump sites. By January of 1973, Sonoma County Sheriff Don Streepeak stood in front of reporters and said what everyone investigating already suspected. These cases were connected. 4 of the victims recovered by that point had been left in locations that, if you drew a line between them, traced an almost straight path through the county. Investigators came to believe something else too, that whoever was doing this didn't just grab strangers off the road. They spoke with their victims first, spent time with them, interviewed them in a sense before killing them. And still, the crime scenes gave investigators almost nothing to work with. No physical evidence, no clothing left behind, no personal belongings. Whoever was doing this understood exactly how to leave a body without leaving a trace. The case sat with detectives for decades, generating some of the biggest names in American crime as suspects. Ted Bundy is documented as having been in the region multiple times between 1968 and 1974. He'd attended Stanford, worked a political campaign nearby, and regularly passed through visiting a girlfriend in the Bay Area. A retired Seattle detective who helped build the case against Bundy elsewhere called him a strong fit for these killings. Investigators eventually pursued DNA testing specifically to confirm or rule him out. It didn't confirm him. Rodney Alcala, convicted of killing dozens of women and girls elsewhere, was also examined. Neither man has ever been definitively tied to a single victim or crime scene here. More recent leads have kept the case alive. In 2022, Sonoma County investigators looked into a possible connection to Jack Alexander Boken, a man who'd been identified through DNA as responsible for a separate 1996 murder. Boken's family had owned property near Santa Rosa back in the 1970s, and investigators noted enough similarities to take a closer look. No confirmed link has been announced. Then, in 2024, an HBO Max documentary series turned public attention toward another person of interest, a man named Jim Mordecai, built around witness accounts placing him near the crime scenes in the early 1970s, and circumstantial evidence tying him to the case. Law enforcement has never confirmed him as a suspect, but the series prompted renewed public pressure to revisit archived evidence, and a cold case investigator has since been assigned to look specifically into him. As of the most recent reporting, the case remains open, still active under the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office, still supported by federal DNA databases in the background. 7 known victims, possibly more if you count the ones simply reported missing and never found. Over 50 years later, no one has ever been arrested. No one has ever been named, only suspected. Carol Spinks, 13, walks to a 7-Eleven a half-mile from her home, sent by her older sister to pick up groceries. She never makes it back. 6 days later, her body is found dumped along Interstate 295, barefoot, sexually assaulted, strangled. At the time, nobody in Washington is thinking serial killer. That kind of crime belongs to New York, to California, not here. But 3 months later, it happens again. 16-year-old Darlenia Johnson is abducted, raped, and murdered. Her body isn't found for 11 days, despite a patrol car driving past the location and radioing in that they'd found nothing. Then, in July, 10-year-old Brenda Crockett is sent to the store for bread and dog food. She never comes home either, but this time, the phone rings at her house about an hour later. Her 7-year-old sister answers. It's Brenda. She says a white man snatched her, that she's in Virginia, that he's arranged a taxi to bring her home. By October, 12-year-old Nenomoshia Yates is sent to a Safeway by her father, just 1 block from home. Witnesses see her buying groceries and leaving the store. No one sees what happens after that. Less than 3 hours later, her body is found on the shoulder of a road in Prince George's County, sexually assaulted, strangled, her shoes missing, just like the others. It's after this murder that a local newspaper first uses the name that will define the case for the next 50 years, the Freeway Phantom. In November, 18-year-old Brenda Woodard becomes victim number 5. And this time, the killer leaves something behind. A note in her pocket, addressed to police. Catch me if you can. 10 months of silence follow. Investigators wonder if the FBI's involvement and the sudden media spotlight scared him into stopping. Then, on September 5th, 1972, 17-year-old Diane Williams doesn't come home from her boyfriend's house. Her body is found near the freeway the next morning, strangled, but unlike the others, not sexually assaulted, and traces of semen recovered were assumed to belong to her boyfriend, not her killer. It's a break in the pattern that has never been fully explained. 6 girls, 10 to 18 years old, 17 months, all abducted from their own neighborhoods in broad daylight, all left along the same stretch of freeway. The investigation that followed was plagued by failures that would haunt the case for decades. Relations between DC police and the Black community in Southeast Washington were already strained, and families of the victims have said publicly, for 50 years, that the case never received the urgency it deserved. In 1974, a convicted rapist in a Virginia prison came forward claiming he knew who the Phantom was. That lead, like every other one before it, went nowhere. Then, in 2009, came a revelation that stunned even the detectives still working the case. DC police admitted, on record, that the entire case file had been lost. Physical evidence, possible DNA from the killer, simply gone. One detective, asked where it might be, could only offer, maybe it's over there in some box and we haven't stumbled across it. Who knows? More recently, journalists digging into the case uncovered something even more troubling. The FBI had been involved in the original investigation and, it turns out, is sitting on more than 20,000 pages of files related to the Freeway Phantom that have never been made public. A Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2020 confirmed the files exist. The FBI's own response was that the earliest those documents might become available is January of 2026, if they're released at all. Whether any surviving evidence could even support modern DNA analysis remains publicly unknown. The tools exist now that didn't exist in 1971, but nobody outside a small circle of investigators can say whether there's anything left to test. What has changed is public attention. A former DC homicide detective reopened the file years ago and worked with a public radio journalist to dig through what evidence remained. A father-daughter research team spent 2 years combing the case and published a book laying out new suspects and clues. A 10-part investigative podcast has since re-examined the entire timeline with fresh interviews from surviving family members. Diane Williams's aunt went on to found an organization supporting the families of murder victims, born directly out of what happened to her niece. A $150,000 reward for information leading to an arrest still stands. It has never been claimed. Diane Williams's sister put it plainly, decades after losing her, "You never forget. There is no closure. Whoever did it has gotten away. They may be living somewhere else, doing it again." 6 girls were taken off the streets of their own neighborhoods in under a year and a half. The case file was lost once. Thousands of federal pages remain sealed. 10-year-old Carmen Colon is sent by her grandmother to the pharmacy, just a block and a half from home, to pick up a prescription. When she arrives, the pharmacist tells her it isn't ready yet. She tells him, "I got to go," and leaves. Witnesses see her get into a car parked near the store. She's reported missing that evening. Less than an hour later, drivers along a nearby road spot something that stops them cold. A young girl's body, discarded in plain view. The case explodes into public consciousness. 5 massive billboards go up along Rochester's expressways, each one 12 feet by 30, bearing Carmen's photograph under a single question: "Do you know who killed Carmen Colon?" A $6,000 reward is offered. Investigators interview her uncle, Miguel Colon, who has a criminal record and had left for Puerto Rico shortly after the murder. He's questioned repeatedly, never charged. Years later, he dies by suicide during an unrelated domestic dispute in front of police, and investigators still don't believe, even then, that he was likely her killer. By December, barely a month later, the number of detectives assigned full-time to Carmen's case has already dropped to 3. Then, on April 2nd, 1973, 11-year-old Wanda Walkowicz is sent to the market by her mother. She never comes home. Her body is found the next day at the bottom of a hill along a state route in the town of Webster. Raped, strangled, her body showing damage consistent with having been thrown from a moving vehicle. Investigators find something strange clinging to her clothing, strands of white cat fur. Her family doesn't own a cat. It's only now that someone in the department notices the pattern that will define this case for the next 50 years. Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, matching double initials. And when investigators look at where the bodies were left, Colon found near Churchville, Walkowicz found in Webster, even the towns match the first letter of each girl's name. Publicly, police downplay any connection between the two cases. Privately, it's a different story. A sergeant is quietly reassigned off Carmen's case to help form a new task force built specifically around Wanda's murder. 7 months later, on November 26, 1973, 11-year-old Michelle Mayenza leaves school and heads toward a shopping plaza, trying to retrieve a purse her mother had left behind days earlier. Witnesses see her get into a tan or beige car. 2 days later, her body is found face down in a ditch in the town of Macedon, raped, strangled with a ligature, and on her clothing, once again, strands of white cat fur. When a police captain is asked directly whether he believes the same man killed all 3 girls, he doesn't hedge. "I am not convinced," he says, "but I strongly suspect we're looking for the same person." Investigators would go on to question more than 800 people. Several names have surfaced as prime suspects over the decades. Kenneth Bianchi, who later became infamous in California as one of the Hillside Stranglers, worked as an ice cream vendor in Rochester at the time, operating near where the first 2 bodies were found. Dennis Termini, known separately as the Garage Rapist, and responsible for at least 14 assaults on teenage girls during this same window, owned a beige car matching witness descriptions and had white cat fur found in his vehicle after his death in an unrelated police pursuit in 1974. Decades later, DNA recovered from Wanda Walkowicz's case was tested against another suspect, Joseph Nasso, a Rochester native who went on to kill multiple women in California, all of them, strikingly, sharing matching first and last initials. The DNA didn't match. One true crime author who spent years investigating the case believes Wanda and Michelle were very likely killed by the same person, given how closely their crime scenes mirror each other, but that Carmen's murder may have been different. Her body was found in a different state of dress, strangled by different means, marked by fingernail scratches the others didn't share. It's possible, some investigators believe, that Rochester was dealing with 2 different offenders wearing the same terrifying pattern. New York State Police still list these cases as open today. DNA evidence from Wanda Walkowicz's case still exists, and her sisters have spent years publicly campaigning for it to be run against modern databases. Whether that ever produces a match remains to be seen. 50 years later, 3 girls with matching initials are still waiting for someone to say a name out loud. A woman walking her dog through the dunes near Race Point spots something half buried in the sand, about a mile from the ranger station. It's a body. A woman, lying on a beach towel, naked, positioned as though she'd simply fallen asleep in the sun. Her head is resting on a pair of folded blue jeans. She hadn't fallen asleep. Investigators determined she'd been dead somewhere between 10 days and 3 weeks. The cause of death is blunt force trauma to the skull, delivered with enough force to nearly crush the left side of her head. Her throat has been cut so deeply that her head is almost completely severed from her body, and her hands are gone, removed, investigators believe, for one reason only, so that whoever did this could make sure she'd never be identified by her fingerprints. For decades, it works. No missing persons report matches her. No dental records turn up a name. Composite sketches, clay facial reconstructions, age progression drawings, all of it circulates for years, and none of it produces so much as a lead. She becomes known simply as the Lady of the Dunes, one of Massachusetts' oldest unsolved homicides, a woman with no name and no story, buried in a state-issued casket while her case goes cold. Investigators exhume her remains more than once over the following decades, hoping new forensic science might finally offer an answer science in the 1970s couldn't. Nothing sticks. The case becomes a fixture of New England true crime lore, discussed in documentaries and message boards, always circling back to the same unanswered question. Who was she? In 2022, a sample of her skeletal remains is sent to a private forensic genealogy lab in Texas. Investigators build a full DNA profile from what's left of her and run it against genetic genealogy databases, tracing distant family connections the same way you'd build a family tree, except working backward from a body instead of forward from a birth certificate. It leads them to living relatives. Confirmatory testing follows. In October, the FBI stands in front of cameras and says her name for the first time in 48 years, Ruth Marie Terry, 37 years old, born in Tennessee, a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a wife, a mother, with ties to Tennessee, California, Massachusetts, and Michigan. The identification opens a door nobody expected. Investigators learn Terry had married a man named Guy Rockwell Moldavan only months before her death, a man who'd go by several aliases over his lifetime and who had already been a suspect in the deaths of a previous wife and a stepdaughter in Seattle years earlier. Witnesses recalled him returning from their honeymoon alone, driving her car, saying only that she had passed away. By August 2023, investigators had what they needed. The Cape and Islands District Attorney announced that Guy Rockwell Moldavan was responsible for Ruth Marie Terry's death. He had died in 2002, 20 years before anyone learned her name. 21 before anyone learned his. 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma leaves her home on Clearview Road in the early afternoon. She tells her mother she's heading to a friend's house nearby, tucking a Bible under her arm along with her purse. It's a short trip, the kind she's made before. She never arrives, her friend waits. Jeanette doesn't show. By evening, her parents report her missing, and Springfield police open a case with almost nothing to work from. No witnesses to an abduction, no vehicle description, no struggle reported anywhere along her route. She has simply stopped existing between one house and another. For 6 weeks, nothing. No leads, no sightings. The family keeps pushing, keeps calling, keeps waiting by a phone that doesn't ring with the answer they need. Then, on September 19th, a dog wandering a wooded area near an abandoned quarry, known locally as the Hudaye Quarry, a place teenagers had nicknamed the Devil's Teeth, for the jagged rock formations jutting out along its cliffs, comes trotting home to its owner's apartment building with something in its mouth. The owner assumes it's a stick or an old bone dug up from the dirt. She gets close enough to look. It's a human forearm. Police are called. What they find at the top of that cliff, once they climb up to it, is Jeanette. 6 weeks exposed to the elements has left her remains badly decomposed, which means the two things investigators need most, a clear cause of death and a clean timeline, are already compromised before the case even begins. What they can determine points towards strangulation. What they can't determine is almost everything else. It's what officers claim to have seen surrounding her body that turns this from a tragedy into a legend. Word spreads that her remains were arranged deliberately, sticks positioned into the shape of crosses, stones laid out around her in a pattern investigators struggle to explain. A local pastor tells reporters he believes a satanic coven is responsible. The Springfield police chief himself is quoted saying he'd heard someone within the department had brought a self-described witch out to the scene to help interpret what they were looking at. Newspapers across the state run with it. Witchcraft seen possible in teenage girl's death. Priest's theory, devil's disciples killed girl. By October, the story isn't about a missing 16-year-old anymore. It's about witches in the New Jersey woods. Decades later, researchers who spent years fighting to obtain the original police file, after being told for years that it had been destroyed in flooding, finally got their hands on the actual crime scene photographs. What they found, after careful review, was a body found in a wooded ravine, and none of the deliberate ritual staging the 1972 headlines had described. No confirmed crosses, no confirmed altar. The occult narrative, it turns out, likely grew from rumor, media sensationalism, and the era's broader panic about satanic cults, more than from anything actually documented at the scene. Strip away the witches, though, and the real mystery hasn't moved an inch. No suspect was ever named. No arrest was ever made. Jeanette De Palma's murder file remains open with the Union County Prosecutor's Office to this day, more than 5 decades after a dog brought home an arm that changed a small New Jersey town forever. 64-year-old Mary McGreevy is found smothered to death in her own home, a pillow pressed over her face until she stopped breathing. It's a quiet death, the kind that could almost pass for natural if you didn't look too closely. Nobody connects it to anything yet. It's the first thread of something that won't be recognized as a pattern for another 6 years. 6 months later, 38-year-old Sylvia Valdez leaves her workplace at night and finds a flat tire waiting for her in the parking lot. A lot attendant fixes it. He watches her speak briefly with 2 men before she drives off. She's found dead in her car the next morning, shot twice behind the ear, a scarf around her neck, her skirt pulled over her head. Her diamond ring is still on her finger. Whoever did this didn't want her jewelry. In 1966, 44-year-old Bernadita Gonzalez walks out of a Miami beauty salon and disappears. 8 weeks pass before a highway patrolman spots her body floating face down in a lake, her skull crushed by what investigators believe was a hatchet. 3 years of silence follow. Then, in August 1969, 21-year-old Sheravon Wooten is found strangled on a dirt road, fingernail marks scored into her neck. By 1970, whatever restraint had existed disappears entirely. In May, 64-year-old Mary Danford is strangled in her own bed after friends grow worried she isn't answering her phone. In June, 64-year-old Ruth Boehner is beaten and strangled in her apartment, her hyoid bones snapped. No sign the killer had to force his way in. In August, 84-year-old Maddie Harris is strangled with a necktie in her own kitchen while her home is ransacked around her. In October, Regina Bonanno, a woman who was deaf and mute, is found bound to her bed, a scarf tied around her throat, her head shoved inside a pillowcase. 11 days after that, 36-year-old Patrice Newkirk is discovered bludgeoned to death in the trunk of her own car, her skull damaged the way it might be if she'd fallen from a building. 9 women, 6 years. Almost none of them sexually assaulted, and yet every scene staged in a way investigators believed was unmistakably sexual. Clothing pulled up, bodies posed, underwear taken as trophies while jewelry was left untouched. Detectives zero in on one man. Calvin Jones Jr., a recently paroled felon who happened to be the same parking attendant who'd fixed Sylvia Valdez's tire the night she died, and who separately knew Patrice Newkirk. He's questioned. He's never charged. Then, in March 1971, 31-year-old Mary Sims is found dead in her home by her husband, sexually assaulted, strangled, stabbed in the throat. That September, 25-year-old Clara Armalee is found strangled face down in her bedroom. No forced entry, no struggle. Neither murder has ever been confirmed as the strangler's work, but neither has ever produced a suspect of its own either. To this day, Miami-Dade police still list these killings among the county's open cold cases from the 1970s. Whoever walked into a string of Miami homes over the better part of a decade, killed alone, vulnerable women in their own beds and kitchens, and vanished each time without leaving a name behind, has never been identified. 22-year-old Eve Stratford walks home to her flat on Lyndhurst Drive in Layton after finishing a shift as a Playboy bunny at London's Playboy Club. A neighbor later recalls hearing a conversation between a man and a woman coming from her flat that night, followed by a loud thud. Nobody investigates the sound at the time. There's no reason to. The next day, Eve is found dead in her bedroom. Her hands are bound with a scarf. Her throat has been cut almost a dozen times. There's no sign of forced entry, which means whoever did this either had a key or she let them in herself. Detectives worked the case hard in the beginning. Eve was well-known, well-liked, connected to London's nightlife and modeling world, and the press runs with her story for weeks. But no arrest follows, and as the months pass, the investigation slows the way these cases always seem to. 6 months later, on September 3, 1975, on the other side of London, 16-year-old Lynn Whedon is walking home to Hounslow after a night out with friends, rushing to beat her curfew. She takes a shortcut through an alleyway near an electricity substation close to her house. She doesn't make it home. She's struck over the head with a blunt object, thrown over a fence into the substation grounds, and raped. She survives the initial attack, but only barely and only for a week. She dies in the hospital from her injuries without ever identifying who did this to her. 2 women, 2 ends of London. No apparent connection between them, no shared friends, no shared places, nothing to suggest their deaths belong to the same story. For nearly 30 years, that's exactly how police treat them, as 2 separate, unsolved tragedies filed away in 2 separate corners of the same unsolved past. Then, in 2004, Lynn's case is reopened. A retired detective sergeant named Derek Carruthers, the same young officer who'd been first on the scene at Eve Stratford's flat back in 1975, had spent decades quietly pushing for semen evidence preserved from Eve's case to be tested using DNA technology that hadn't existed at the time of either murder. In 2006, that push produces an answer nobody expects. The DNA recovered from Lynn Whedon's case matches the DNA recovered from Eve Stratford's case. 2 murders, 6 months, and several miles apart, committed by the same man. It confirms what some investigators had quietly suspected for decades, and it reframes both cases entirely. No longer 2 isolated tragedies, but the work of a single offender who killed a stranger in her own home, then killed a teenage girl in a dark alley, and walked away clean both times. The Metropolitan Police have since offered rewards as high as £40,000 for information, and have publicly stated they believe the killer, now likely in his 70s or 80s if still alive, has spent decades keeping the secret from everyone in his life. A partner, a friend, a cellmate, someone. 50 years on, the DNA profile still exists, still waiting in a database for a match that has never come. Eve Stratford and Lynn Whedon's killer has a genetic signature on file with London police. He has never had a name. Just before 1 in the afternoon, 32-year-old Wendy Sewell, a legal secretary at the local Forestry Commission office, walks into Bakewell Cemetery on her lunch break. A witness sees her enter around 12:50. Minutes later, 17-year-old Stephen Downing, the cemetery's groundskeeper, returns from his own lunch to find her lying on the footpath, badly beaten and barely conscious. Downing runs for help. By the time anyone returns, Wendy's attacker has come back, dragged her body to a second location, and vanished. She's found there shortly after, struck 7 times in the head with the wooden handle of a pickaxe, sexually assaulted, her skull fractured. She's rushed to intensive care. 2 days later, she dies without ever naming who did this to her. Police focus almost immediately on Downing, the boy who found her. He has learning difficulties and a reading age far below his actual age. He's held and questioned for 9 hours without a solicitor present. By the end of it, he signed a confession containing words investigators later determined he didn't understand. He retracts it almost immediately. It doesn't matter. In 1974, he's convicted of her murder and sentenced to an indefinite prison term. Because his conviction relies on a confession rather than an admission of guilt at trial, English law at the time requires him to admit responsibility before he can be considered for parole. Downing refuses, insisting he didn't do it. That refusal keeps him in prison for years beyond what his original sentence would have required. The case fades from national attention for 2 decades until 1994, when Don Hale, editor of the local Matlock Mercury newspaper, is approached by Downing's family and begins digging. What he finds unravels the entire prosecution. The interrogation had violated basic legal procedure. Physical evidence at the scene had never been properly tested, and a pathology report from the original 1973 investigation, one that could have exonerated Downing outright had it been introduced at trial, had simply never surfaced. Hale's reporting builds into a sustained campaign. In 2001, Downing is released on bail. In 2002, after a review by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, his conviction is formally quashed. Lord Justice Pill, presiding over the appeal, states plainly that, without the disputed confession, there had never been a case against him at all. Stephen Downing had spent 27 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit, one of the longest wrongful imprisonments in British legal history. Derbyshire police launch a full reinvestigation, known as Operation Noble, combing back through the original case with modern forensic methods. It identifies serious failures in the 1973 investigation. It does not identify Wendy Sewell's killer. In 2005, England changed its double jeopardy laws, opening the door for previously tried suspects to face retrial under certain conditions. Derbyshire police have since applied to bring new charges related to the case. As of the most recent public reporting, no retrial of anyone has taken place. Wendy Sewell was murdered in broad daylight in a small-town cemetery, in front of no witnesses who ever came forward with a name. The man convicted of killing her spent 27 years paying for it. Her actual killer never has. 18-year-old Jacqueline Ansel Lamb, known to friends as Jachi, spends the weekend in London, staying with a man she'd met at a party in Earl's Court. On Sunday afternoon, he drops her at Junction 4 of the M1, where she plans to hitchhike the 200 miles back to Manchester, where she works as a secretary. It's an ordinary decision for a young woman in 1970, when hitchhiking along Britain's motorways is still a common, casual way to travel. She's seen later that evening at the Opera Cafe near Junction 20 of the M6 in Cheshire, sometime between 9 and 10 p.m., in the company of a smartly dressed man believed to have been driving a white Jaguar. That's the last confirmed sighting of her alive. On March 14th, a farmer discovers her semi-nude body near Knutsford, in the village of Mere, Cheshire. She's been raped and strangled with a length of electrical wire, found face down, covered by her own jacket. 7 months pass. Then, on October 12th, 24-year-old Barbara Mayo, a trainee teacher from Hammersmith in London, sets out to hitchhike roughly 250 miles north to Catterick, North Yorkshire, intending to retrieve her boyfriend's car from a garage where it had broken down. She's last seen getting into a Morris estate car on the A610 near Kimberley, Nottinghamshire, around 4 in the afternoon, a road that connects directly to the M1, not far from where Jacqueline Ansel Lamb had vanished the previous spring. Barbara never arrives. When she fails to return, her boyfriend reports her missing. 4 days later, on October 18th, a family out picking chestnuts finds her body in a wooded area near what's now Junction 29 of the M1, close to Alt Hucknall in Derbyshire. She too has been raped, beaten around the head, and strangled, this time with a length of flex. She too is found face down, covered by her own jacket. 2 young women, both hitchhiking major English motorways, both last seen getting into a vehicle with an unidentified man, both left in nearly identical positions at their crime scenes, 7 months and roughly 100 miles apart. Investigators at the time suspect the same person is responsible for both, and the press dubs him the monster of the motorway. Despite the similarities, no forensic link between the 2 cases has ever been formally confirmed. Claims that DNA evidence ties the murders together have circulated for years in press coverage and online, but these reports are considered by researchers to be either mistaken or premature. No confirmed DNA match has been publicly established connecting Ansel Lamb's and Mayo's cases to a single perpetrator. Both cases have drawn other theories over the decades. Some researchers have floated a possible connection to Peter Sutcliffe, later convicted as the Yorkshire Ripper, though nothing has ever tied him directly to either murder. Barbara Mayo's case also remains part of Operation Anagram, a long-running investigation examining unsolved killings potentially linked to convicted serial killer Peter Tobin, though as of the most recent reporting, no charges have ever been brought against him in her death. No one has ever been arrested in either case. 6-year-old Gary Shields lives with his family in Tynemouth and is playing outside near his home, as he often does, on the evening of his death. When he doesn't come home, his parents call the police, and an extensive search begins. His body is found later that night in shrubbery not far from the family's home, after an anonymous call directs officers to the location. He had been sexually assaulted. Beyond these bare details, the documented record on this case is thin. Sources disagree even on the exact date. Some place it on August 4th, others on August 8th, 1974. Limited independent reporting exists beyond a small number of secondary accounts, and no major news archive or court record was accessible to verify further specifics, including any claims about suspects, confessions, or legal proceedings that may have followed. Because of that, none of those details are included here. What can be confirmed? A 6-year-old boy was killed in North Shields in early August 1974, and his case remains listed as unsolved. This is one of the more thinly documented cases in this list. If you have verified information about Gary Shields' case, the original investigating force was Northumbria Police, and cases like this often depend on exactly that kind of public memory to move forward, even 50 years later. 17-year-old Caroline Doreen Allen finishes a babysitting job on Walnut Avenue in Bramcote at around 8 in the evening. She's planning a short journey home, either a 15-minute bus ride or a walk, back to her family in the nearby village of Kinolton. Somewhere along that short route, she vanishes completely. No struggle is reported, no witnesses come forward describing an obvious abduction. She simply doesn't arrive home, and for more than a year and a half, nobody knows what happened to her. Then, in December 1975, her skeletal remains are discovered in a small copse of trees near Old Dalby, a rural area of Leicestershire, roughly 13 miles from where she was last seen. By this point, decomposition has taken almost everything a pathologist would need. Forensic examiners are unable to conclusively determine her cause of death, though they believe she may have suffered blunt force trauma to the head. During the investigation, police identify a man named John Stothert, who owned a green Lotus Europa and had reportedly picked up a hitchhiker on the night Caroline disappeared. Contemporary news coverage from January 1976 shows Stothert publicly appealing for a man who could clear his name to come forward, after police became satisfied that a garage mechanic named Nigel Taylor, not Caroline, had actually been the hitchhiker Stothert picked up that night. No charges were ever brought against Stothert or anyone else in connection with Caroline's death. In the years since, some independent researchers have raised the theory that Caroline may have been a victim of Peter Sutcliffe, later convicted as the Yorkshire Ripper, pointing to her age, the head trauma, her clothing being removed, and the fact that she was hitchhiking. Details these researchers argue fit a pattern consistent with some of Sutcliffe's later confirmed crimes. It's worth being direct about what that theory actually is. Speculation built on circumstantial similarities, published by independent researchers and local press, not a conclusion reached or confirmed by police. No evidence has ever been presented publicly that directly ties Sutcliffe or anyone else to Caroline Allen's murder. Her case remains open with what is now Leicestershire Police. A 17-year-old girl walked away from a babysitting job on an April evening in 1974 and never came home. No one has ever been charged with her death. 17-year-old Dolores de la Pena had graduated high school just over a month earlier, an honors student with plans to train as an X-ray technician that fall. Just before midnight, she's walking the last block toward her home in the Kensington neighborhood after a night out with friends. A witness sees a slender, brown-haired young man attack her, then drag her, kicking and screaming, into a maroon Chevrolet parked nearby. Other neighbors later tell police they heard a young woman's high-pitched screaming that night, but didn't call it in at the time. Dolores never comes home. Her parents report her missing just after 1 in the morning. Investigators find her necklace and drops of blood in the street outside her house. Philadelphia police treat it as an abduction from the start and throw resources at it. More than 20,000 flyers distributed across the city, over 150 people questioned within the first week alone, including several individuals with known ties to drug trafficking who fail polygraph tests during questioning. Investigators never find evidence that Dolores herself was involved with drugs in any way. On July 22nd, a man walking his dog through a wooded area near Toms River, New Jersey, finds her torso and severed arms. 7 days later, on July 29th, her legs are discovered near a dirt road in the neighboring township of Cedar Glen West. Her body is formally identified on July 24th through spinal X-rays taken 2 years earlier. Her head is never found. An autopsy is unable to determine an exact cause of death or confirm whether she was sexually assaulted, though the coroner notes she'd been severely beaten before she died. The dismemberment itself is methodical, carried out with a sharp instrument rather than hacked apart, indicating it happened after death, not during the attack. Her fingertips are also found to have been deliberately removed, apparently to prevent identification through fingerprints. Investigators believe her murder may be connected to the drug trade, theorizing she was either wrongly blamed by former roommates for stealing narcotics or targeted in retaliation over an unpaid drug debt tied to her boyfriend. Neither theory has ever been confirmed by law enforcement, and both remain officially unproven. The case generates over 16 boxes of documentation in the following years. None of it produces an arrest. Dolores de la Pena's murder remains one of Philadelphia's most enduring unsolved cases. Investigators have periodically reviewed the file in the decades since, but as of the most recent public reporting, no charges have ever been filed and her head has never been recovered. 14-year-old Rhonda Johnson and her best friend, 13-year-old Sharon Shaw, spend the day soaking up the sun on Galveston Beach, just about a week before Sharon's 14th birthday. Witnesses see the girls walking along Seawall Boulevard as they leave. Neither of them makes it home. For months, there's nothing. No bodies, no arrests, no answers. Just two missing teenage girls and a search that keeps coming up empty. Then, on January 3rd, 1972, two boys fishing in Clear Lake spot something floating in the water. At first, they think it's a ball, it's a human skull. 6 weeks later, searchers combing the area near the lake find the rest of the remains, not just one body, but two, hidden together in a nearby swamp. Dental records confirm what everyone already fears. It's Rhonda and Sharon. 5 months after their remains are found, 23-year-old gas station attendant Michael Lloyd Self is arrested and charged with both murders. He's convicted of Sharon Shaw's killing in 1975 and sentenced to life in prison. Here's where the story stops being simple. Self's own defenders have long argued his confession was coerced, that he was beaten, threatened at gunpoint, and forced to rewrite his statement multiple times until it matched what investigators wanted to hear. He maintained his innocence for the rest of his life. He died in prison of cancer in 2000, still serving that sentence. Then, in 1998, while already incarcerated for an unrelated 1978 murder, a man named Edward Harold Bell wrote to Texas authorities confessing to killing Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw himself, along with, he claimed, several other teenage girls murdered in the Galveston area during that same era. Bell described a violent, delusional belief system driving the killings. His confession has never resulted in charges being filed in Rhonda and Sharon's case, and officially, Michael Lloyd Self's conviction has never been overturned. So the case sits in an uncomfortable place. One man convicted and dead, another man who confessed and was never charged, and two teenage girls whose actual killer, or killers, may never be definitively proven to investigators or the public's satisfaction. Their deaths remain tied to a broader stretch of unsolved murders along the Interstate 45 corridor between Houston and Galveston, an area that's come to be known as the Texas Killing Fields, where the bodies of numerous young women have surfaced since the 1970s with no coordinated resolution. We're 14 cases in, and every single one you've just heard is still open. If you're still with us, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. It genuinely helps these cases get seen. The next batch of cases we're covering barely got touched by British media at the time. You're not going to want to miss them. 18-year-old Susan Long spends the evening at the Gala Dance Hall in Norwich with her boyfriend. She leaves around 10:25 p.m. to catch the last bus home to Aylsham. Other passengers on that bus later confirmed to police that Susan was on board and got off when it reached Aylsham Marketplace at 11:10 p.m. From there, it should have been a short walk home. It's the last confirmed sighting of her alive. At 5:15 the next morning, a local milkman finds her body on Berg Road, about a mile from where she'd gotten off the bus. She's been sexually assaulted and strangled. Investigators believe Susan didn't walk to that location. They believe she was driven there, though whether she got into a vehicle willingly or was forced remains unknown. What makes that especially puzzling to detectives is that those who knew her insisted she wasn't the type to accept a lift from a stranger. Scotland Yard leads a full-scale murder inquiry. Forensic examiners recover semen at the scene and determine the offender belonged to a rare blood group, prompting police to take blood samples from men across the Aylsham area. Investigators also recover flakes of car paint from Susan's clothing, tracing them to a vehicle originally painted pompadour blue before being resprayed metallic maroon. Neither lead produces a suspect. The case is formally reopened in February 2004, when investigators extract a DNA profile from blood preserved on her clothing decades earlier. Norfolk police confirm they now hold a complete DNA profile of her likely attacker, and since 2003 have continued running familial DNA comparisons, hoping a relative's profile in a modern database might eventually point them toward him. Notably, Susan's murder happened just days before another 18-year-old, Jacqueline Ansel Lamb, was killed in Cheshire after hitchhiking, a case some researchers have wondered might be connected, though no evidence has ever confirmed a link between the two. Norfolk Constabulary still list Susan Long's case among those they believe could be solved with a single piece of information from the public. Her killer's genetic profile exists. His name has never been attached to it. 20-year-old Barbara Forrest is a devoutly religious young woman, active at St. Mark's Lutheran Church and working as a nurse at the Pipe Hayes Children's Home. On this bank holiday Monday, she attends a church service with her boyfriend, Simon Belcher, who's filling in for his father. Afterward, the couple spends the evening visiting a few pubs nearby. Around 1 a.m, Simon walks her to Colmore Circus, where she's meant to catch the number 67 bus home. That's the last time he sees her. She never makes it home. Several days later, on June 4th, her body is found in a ditch near Pipe Hayes Park, barely 500 yards from both her home and her workplace. She's been raped and strangled. Because Barbara was well known in her community as a devout, clean-cut young woman, her murder generates intense public outrage, and police commit heavy resources to the investigation, eventually deploying more than 100 detectives. 10 days before her death, Barbara had confided something to a co-worker that would take on a haunting weight afterward. She told them, "This is going to be my unlucky month. I just know it. Don't ask me why." By September 1974, investigators believe they've found their man. Michael Ian Thornton, a 38-year-old co-worker of Barbara's who lived on Chester Road, is arrested and charged with her murder after police reportedly find bloodstains on his trousers and uncover a false alibi provided by his mother. He stands trial. A judge ultimately rules there isn't sufficient evidence linking him directly to the crime, and Thornton is acquitted. No one else has ever been charged. The case remains formally unsolved. Barbara's sister Erica never accepted the verdict. In 2012, she publicly demanded the case be reopened and pushed for existing evidence to be reviewed using modern DNA technology, hoping science that didn't exist in 1974 might finally identify who was actually responsible. The case took on an eerie second life in the press for another reason entirely. Journalists and true crime writers noticed that Barbara's murder bore a striking resemblance to the 1817 killing of Mary Ashford, a young woman murdered in the very same park 157 years earlier after a night out dancing. In that case, too, a suspect was tried and acquitted for lack of evidence. His name, by pure coincidence, was also Thornton. Whether that similarity means anything beyond coincidence is impossible to say. What's certain is this: 2 young women, separated by more than a century and a half, both died in Pipe Hayes Park after a night of dancing, and in both cases, the man authorities charged walked free. Barbara Forrest's murder remains open with West Midlands Police to this day. No one has ever been convicted. 8-year-old Helen Bailey is found dead in a secluded wooded area, dressed entirely in blue, a detail that will earn her the nickname Little Girl Blue in the press that follows. Her throat has been cut, her jugular veins severed. And yet, astonishingly, her death is not initially treated as a murder investigation at all. The original inquest returns an open verdict of undetermined causes, with officials at the time floating the possibility that she died in some kind of accident, or even a practical joke that had gone catastrophically wrong, despite the nature and location of her injuries. That verdict stands, officially unchallenged, for more than 4 decades. Behind the scenes, though, investigators have something the public doesn't know about for years. In the late 1970s, a man comes forward and confesses to strangling Helen and then cutting her throat. What makes his confession credible to detectives isn't just the admission itself, it's that he describes specific forensic details of how she died that had never been made public and weren't part of the original 1976 inquest record. Several investigators over the years have come to believe this man is very likely responsible for her death. He is never charged. The confession, despite its details, was never enough on its own to secure a prosecution, and officially, the case remains listed as unsolved to this day. It takes until 2019 for the record to catch up with what investigators already suspected. The High Court orders a new inquest, and that year, the original undetermined verdict is formally overturned and replaced with a ruling of unlawful killing, a legal acknowledgement, more than 40 years later, that Helen Bailey was murdered. It's worth being direct here. This case has no connection whatsoever to the far more widely reported 2016 murder of a British author who shared the same name, Helen Bailey, killed by her fiancé in Hertfordshire. That is a separate case, fully solved, with a named and convicted killer. This Helen Bailey is a different person entirely. An 8-year-old girl from Birmingham, killed 41 years earlier, whose case has never been closed with a conviction. More than 50 years after she was found in that great bar Woodland, the record now formally recognizes that Helen Bailey was murdered. The man investigators believe it has never faced a court for it. 39-year-old Josephine Backshall, a wife and mother of 3, places an advertisement in her local newspaper hoping to pick up part-time work. A man who gives his name as Peter responds, telling her he's a photographer and offering her modeling work advertising cosmetics. He visits her at home and photographs her on the front lawn. The two speak on the phone several times afterward. Josephine tells her husband Mike that Peter seems like a good sort. On the evening of October 29th, Peter calls again, asking if she can fill in for another model who's canceled. Josephine agrees to meet him at 6:30 that evening. She leaves home and is never seen alive by her family again. At around 7:15 p.m., a red Ford Cortina believed to be hers is spotted with its bonnet up on Collingwood Road in Witham. Later that night, witnesses at the Fountain Public House in Good Easter recall Josephine and a mystery man stopping in for a drink. The landlady describes him as unusually tall enough that his head brushed the beer mugs hanging above the bar, and she notes he seemed to be deliberately avoiding letting anyone get a clear look at his face. 3 days later, on November 1st, Josephine's body is found face down in a pond off Berry Green Lane near the village of Little Haddam in Hertfordshire, nearly 35 miles from her home. Her hands are bound tightly in front of her with cord. She's been strangled. Her wristwatch had stopped at 8:10. Detectives find no evidence of sexual assault, and a post-mortem reveals traces of a Chinese meal in her stomach, suggesting she and her killer had stopped to eat together at some point that evening. The only real lead police ever develop is the name Peter and a vague physical description. Investigators discover Josephine wasn't the only woman targeted this way. Several other women in the area had also been offered modeling work by a man calling himself Peter after placing similar newspaper ads, though the others had all turned him down. None could identify him. Despite a massive investigation spanning both Essex and Hertfordshire police forces, no arrest is ever made. In 2010, Hertfordshire's Cold Case Review Unit reopens the file alongside Josephine's children, appealing again for information about the telephone box believed to have been used to lure her that night. In 2009, her children, Christopher, Sarah, and Emma, who were just 12, 10, and 7 when their mother was killed, spoke publicly, describing a lifetime of unanswered questions about who took her from them. Josephine Backshall's murder remains unsolved. The man known only as Peter has never been identified. 37-year-old Kay O'Connor, a shorthand typist, takes a day off work. She spends the early afternoon shopping on Butt Road, stops in to visit her mother, who lives just 2 doors down, then continues on to the post office to collect her mother's pension. It's an ordinary errand day. She walks the short distance home to Wickham Road and lets herself in. She is never seen alive again. Sometime between 2:30 and 4:10 that afternoon, someone attacks her inside her own kitchen. A pane of glass in the kitchen door appears to have been smashed from the outside, though investigators are never able to determine for certain whether her killer broke in after she arrived home or was already waiting inside. Kay is beaten, strangled, and stabbed twice. Some of her clothing is removed, though it's never conclusively established whether she was sexually assaulted. Neighbors hear a commotion coming from the house and go to check on her. They find her body on the kitchen floor, next to a bloodied knife. Essex police launch a massive investigation. Over 2,000 statements are taken. 339 people are questioned. No charges are ever brought, and no clear motive is ever established. Kay's husband, Tony, who had been working in London at the time of her death, later says he could think of no one who would have wanted to hurt her. The case is formally reopened on its 30th anniversary in 2004, after new information reaches Essex police in the wake of an unrelated Crime Stoppers campaign covering other unsolved regional murders. It's reopened again in 2018 when a former hospital ward sister comes forward publicly for the first time, revealing that a charge nurse named Patrick Marin, one of the original police suspects, had confessed the killing to her privately in the weeks after it happened. Maran had been questioned by police at the time, but by the time this account surfaces decades later, he has already died, placing him permanently beyond prosecution. Whether he was genuinely responsible has never been confirmed. Essex police have also stated that advances in forensic technology since 1974 have allowed them to conduct testing that wasn't possible at the time of the original investigation, and the case remains part of the force's ongoing effort to resolve its oldest unsolved killings. 29-year-old Gloria Booth, a married barmaid, finishes her shift at the White Hart pub on Yading Lane, Northolt at 11:30 at night. She's seen walking along the A40 toward a nearby war memorial, heading in the direction of home. At some point during that walk, she calls a fellow barman named Hugh Allen from a phone box. When he answers, she says, "Is that you, Hugh?" The line goes dead. It's the last anyone hears from her alive. The next morning, Sunday, June 13th, a newspaper delivery boy taking a shortcut through South Ruislip Park comes across a young woman's body, partially clothed. He checks for a pulse, then runs home to alert his parents. Separately, a dog walker finds her as well and calls police, inadvertently disturbing the scene while covering her body out of a sense of decency. Gloria has been strangled and mutilated with a knife. Her body bears numerous bite marks. Police conclude the attack was sexually motivated, though there's no evidence she was actually sexually assaulted, leading some investigators at the time to theorize her killer may have been impotent. One of her shoes is found deliberately hidden beneath a hedge nearby, in contrast to the rest of her clothing, which is simply scattered around her body. At her inquest, the coroner describes the case as having aspects of an extremely disturbing nature, with unusual features he declines to disclose publicly unless an arrest is made. No arrest ever comes. Decades later, in 2013, retired police constable Chris Clark, researching a series of unsolved London area murders from the early 1970s, proposes that Gloria may have been an early victim of Peter Sutcliffe, who would later be convicted as the Yorkshire Ripper for murdering 13 women between 1975 and 1980. Clark points to the bite marks, noting Sutcliffe had a gap in his teeth, and to a length of knotted nylon rope police found in Sutcliffe's possession at his arrest, which he believed mechanically matched bruising found on Gloria's neck. He also notes Sutcliffe's then-girlfriend lived near the area at the time. Gloria's own family, including her cousin Bill Pearson, publicly called on the Metropolitan Police to formally investigate the possible connection. The Met confirmed it was reviewing the case and awaiting forensic test results as part of a broader review, Operation Yetna, into historic unsolved London murders. The proposed link to Sutcliffe has never been officially confirmed. Sutcliffe died in prison in November 2020, having never been charged in Gloria Booth's death. No one has ever been convicted of murdering Gloria Booth. 17-year-old Dorothy Layden spends the evening at the Golden Garter nightclub in Wythenshawe, where she'd gone to see soul singer Jimmy Ruffin perform. Afterward, she heads towards central Manchester, making her way home. She never arrives. She's found beaten to death with a brick and raped. Her murder shocks the local community, but despite an investigation at the time, no one is ever charged, and the case grows cold in the years that follow. Suspicion around Dorothy's murder resurfaces years later, attaching itself to a man named Trevor Hardy, a Manchester serial killer later dubbed the Beast of Manchester, convicted in 1977 of murdering 3 teenage girls, Janet Stewart, Wanda Scala, and Sharon Mosoff, between December 1974 and March 1976. For years, locals in Manchester had privately wondered whether Dorothy's earlier unsolved death might also have been his work, given the similarities in victim age and circumstance. In 2004, Dorothy's family formally asked Greater Manchester Police to re-examine the old evidence in light of the Hardy connection. Detectives reopened the case and ran forensic testing that hadn't been available at the time of the original 1971 investigation. The result cut the theory off at the root. DNA evidence recovered from the scene was compared against Hardy's profile and did not match him. Investigators concluded the forensic evidence effectively exonerated him. That finding leaves Dorothy Layden's case exactly where it started, unsolved, with her actual killer never identified, and the one publicly proposed suspect formally ruled out by science rather than confirmed by it. She remains one of several Manchester area cases from the era that continue to sit unresolved, a name still listed among Britain's open unsolved killings from the 1970s. 14-year-old Judith Roberts, a student at Queen Elizabeth Grammar School, leaves her home in Wigginton around 6 in the evening, taking her green Raleigh bicycle out for her usual after-school ride along the country lanes near Comberford Lane. It's a route she rides regularly. This time, she doesn't come home. 3 days later, on June 10th, her body is found in a field just off Comberford Lane, partially hidden beneath a pile of hedge clippings and plastic fertilizer bags. Her bicycle lies nearby in the hedge. She's been struck in the head 19 separate times, with one devastating blow to the back of her skull that would have knocked her unconscious instantly and ultimately killed her. The lower half of her body has been stripped, though there are no signs she was sexually assaulted. The investigation that follows becomes one of the most intensive manhunts the Midlands has seen in years. Then, in October 1972, 17-year-old Andrew Evans, a young soldier stationed nearby at Whittington Barracks, walks into a police station asking to see a photograph of the victim. Over 3 days of interviews, he gives a signed confession, later explaining that he'd seen Judith's face appear to him in a dream. He soon retracts the confession, but at trial in 1973, a jury convicts him anyway, and he's sentenced to life in prison. Evans spends the next 25 years in prison, consistently maintaining he didn't do it. His case finally draws attention from the human rights organization Justice in the mid-1990s, and in 1997 his conviction is formally quashed. The appeal finds no scientific evidence ever tied him to the crime. His conviction had rested entirely on a confession increasingly viewed as unreliable, made under significant psychological distress by a vulnerable young man. That leaves Judith's actual killer unidentified to this day. In more recent years, author Chris Clark has proposed a new theory, arguing Peter Sutcliffe, later convicted as the Yorkshire Ripper, may have been responsible. Clark points to reported eyewitness sightings of a gray Ford Escort trailing Judith that evening. A car matching one Sutcliffe was known to drive at the time, along with a farm laborer's account of a similar car being backed into the field around 7 p.m. that night. This theory has drawn public attention through a dedicated book, but has never been confirmed by police, and Judith's murder has never been officially added to Sutcliffe's list of victims. One innocent man served a quarter century for a murder he didn't commit, and Judith Roberts' actual killer has never been identified. 23-year-old Amala Ruth DeVere Whelan has only been living in her flat at 61 Randolph Avenue for about 3 weeks, having recently moved on from working and lodging at the Bar Lotus, a pub in Camden. She's an active member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, popular and well-connected, with a wide circle of friends spanning London's art scene. On the evening of November 12th, she's last seen alive at 10:30 p.m. at the Warrington Public House on Sutherland Avenue, not far from her flat. She never turns up again. Several days later, a painter working in the building discovers her body inside her flat. She's been beaten, raped, and strangled with a stocking. There's no sign of forced entry anywhere in the flat, leading detectives to conclude she likely knew her attacker, or had let him in herself. What makes the scene especially chilling is what officers find sprayed across the wall of the front room: the word "Ripper," written using detergent squeezed from a washing-up liquid bottle. Despite a full forensic and fingerprint investigation at the time, no suspect is ever identified, and the case is filed away unsolved. It resurfaces publicly decades later. In January 2017, on the eve of the murder's 44th anniversary, the Metropolitan Police's Special Casework Investigation Team issues a fresh public appeal led by Detective Inspector Susan Stansfield. She specifically asks anyone who lived near Randolph Avenue in the early 1970s or who knew Amala or her family to come forward, including, notably, Amala's younger sister, who was about 12 years old at the time of the murder and would have been around 56 when the appeal was made. Stansfield states plainly that she remains convinced someone, somewhere, still knows what happened that night. As of the most recent reporting, that appeal has not produced a named suspect, and the murder remains formally unsolved. Amala Ruth DeVere Whelan's killer has never been identified. Whoever wrote that word on her wall has never been made to answer for it. 15-year-old Jackie Seston is at home on Mount Stephen Avenue on a Tuesday afternoon. Sometime between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m., someone enters the house, rapes her, and stabs her to death. The man who finds her body is Albert Taylor, who had been dating Jackie's older sister. Not long after the murder, he's arrested and charged. Taylor gives police an account of his movements that afternoon, claiming he'd been standing on the platform at Peterborough train station at 1:15 p.m., where he specifically recalled hearing the station clock ticking. He says he then arrived at the Seston home around 2 o'clock, discovered Jackie's body, and fled the house in a panic. That detail becomes the case against him. The prosecution argues the clock at Peterborough station was in fact silent at the time, meaning Taylor couldn't have heard it tick, meaning his alibi was a lie. On the strength of that argument, a jury finds him guilty, and he's convicted of Jackie's murder. He's later released, and the case is moved back into the Unsolved column, where it has remained ever since. Official National Archives records confirm Albert Taylor was tried for the murder of 15-year-old Jacqueline Seston at Walton, near Peterborough, in October 1973. But with his conviction not standing, the case today carries no confirmed perpetrator. The identity of whoever raped and murdered Jackie Seston in her own home that October afternoon has never been conclusively established. The case remains open, one of Peterborough's oldest unresolved killings. Jacqueline Johns, an insurance clerk from Norbury Avenue, Thornton Heath, attends a friend's wedding in Leigh-on-Sea, Essex, on a Saturday night. Investigators believe she likely caught either a tube train to Victoria Station or an Eastern Region train to Fenchurch Street to make her way home afterward. She never arrives. On October 1st, workers near Battersea Power Station discover her nude body lying beside a railway siding. Murder squad detectives investigating her death become convinced early on that Jacqueline hadn't simply been killed shortly after she went missing. Based on the evidence at the scene, they conclude she was almost certainly abducted and held captive for roughly 24 hours before she was killed, meaning whoever took her kept her somewhere for the better part of a day before her murder. Investigators at the time also examined the possibility that she may have missed her train connection at Victoria and attempted to hitch a ride across Chelsea Bridge instead, though this was never confirmed. Despite a significant police investigation at the time, no suspect is ever charged in connection with her death. Records of contemporary newspaper coverage confirm both the discovery of her body and the detail of her suspected abduction. Though beyond the original 1973 reporting, very little about the case has resurfaced publicly in the decades since. It remains one of the more thinly documented unsolved cases from this era, with no significant cold case review, DNA breakthrough, or renewed police appeal identified in the years that followed. Jacqueline Johns' murder remains unsolved. Whoever held her captive for a day before killing her and leaving her body near Battersea Power Station has never been identified. 53-year-old Iris Thompson lives in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Coombe Rise with her husband Kenneth and her elderly mother, 79-year-old Caroline Woodcock, a widow who relies on her daughter for support. The two women are described as very close, sharing the home together in an ordinary, unremarkable routine. On the morning of September 11th, Kenneth leaves for work as usual. A short time later, both women are found dead inside the house. They've been savagely beaten and stabbed multiple times, the injuries suggesting a frenzied, violent attack rather than anything calculated or controlled. There's no sign of forced entry anywhere in the home, which leads investigators to believe the person responsible was either known to Iris and Caroline or was led inside without any resistance. Nothing of significant value appears to have been taken from the house. There's no immediately obvious motive. The case draws heavy national press attention within days. The Times runs the headline, "Police Hunt for Berserk Killer of Two Women" on September 12th, describing a senior police official's belief that whoever did this had lost control entirely during the attack. Official National Archives records confirm that a woman named Pamela Olive Draper is formally linked to the case file for the murders of Iris Frances Thompson and Caroline Rose Woodcock. However, no publicly available detail confirms whether Draper was ever considered a serious suspect, questioned, or ultimately cleared. The government's own records offer no further transparency on her connection to the case, which has fueled ongoing speculation about whether investigators once had a viable lead that was never pursued to prosecution. No one has ever been charged. The murders of a mother and daughter, killed together in their own home on an ordinary Tuesday morning, remain unsolved. 20-year-old Glenys Carruthers, a physical education student at Bedford College, travels from Bedford to Bristol to attend a friend's 21st birthday party. Britain at the time is in the grip of an energy crisis, with Prime Minister Edward Heath locked in a bitter standoff with the country's miners, and the streets around the party are dark, unlit by the usual glow of streetlights. Around 10:20 p.m., Glennis leaves the party, possibly to get some fresh air or to use a nearby telephone kiosk to make a call. She walks roughly half a mile alone through the pitch-black streets of Clifton. She reaches a grassy area near a slip road between the Avenue and Northcote Road, close to Bristol Zoo, where a public telephone kiosk stands nearby. It's there that she encounters her killer. A local zoo overseer named Alf Elliott, out walking his dogs that night, later tells police he passed what he assumed was a courting couple sitting in the grass near that spot. When he walked back past the same location a short time later, he saw the man get up and walk away, leaving the woman lying there. Something about it struck him as wrong, and he called out, "Hey, what's your game?" The man didn't answer. Elliott repeated himself. Still no response. Glennis is found strangled at the scene. Despite Elliott's account and a significant police investigation at the time, no suspect is ever charged, and the case remains formally unsolved. The case resurfaced in national headlines decades later, in 2011, after investigators and journalists noted striking similarities between Glennis's murder and the killing of Joanna Yates, a young woman found strangled in Bristol that Christmas. Avon and Somerset police stated publicly at the time that they were not formally linking the two cases, though they noted its routine procedure to revisit older files whenever new information comes to light in a current investigation. No confirmed connection between the two murders has ever been established. Glennis Carruthers' killer has never been identified. The man Alf Elliott saw walking away from her that night has never been named. 19-year-old tractor driver Andrew Head is out walking near a track leading to Brakehill Farm when he comes across something wrapped in plastic sheeting lying in the undergrowth. He lifts one corner of the covering. That's all it takes. "I could see what it was," he later recalls. "I went home and phoned the police." What he'd found is the decomposed body of a woman wrapped in a plastic sheet embossed with the words "National Cash Registers," her hands and legs bound to her body with an unusual 4-strand rope, a type not common in the area. She's wearing only a pink 1969 Marks & Spencer nightdress. It has never been found, despite police using combine harvesters to clear and search the surrounding fields. The initial post-mortem estimates she was between 23 and 35 years old, likely killed in the first or second week of August, roughly 2 weeks before her body was discovered. Investigators quickly developed their strongest lead, a woman known locally only as the Duchess, believed to be an escort working the docks in Great Yarmouth. The Duchess was known to claim Danish origins and had reportedly vanished without explanation in early August 1974, leaving her possessions behind. Because she disappeared without a trace, investigators have never been able to confirm or rule out whether she and the headless victim are the same person. The case goes cold for decades. In 2007, Norfolk police reopen it under Detective Chief Inspector Andy Guy, exhuming the woman's remains and running modern forensic analysis unavailable in 1974. The results are revealing. She was right-handed, had given birth at least once, and isotope analysis of her remains suggests she'd consumed water and food consistent with living in the part of Central Europe spanning Denmark, Germany, Austria, and northern Italy, a detail that lines up with the theory that she may indeed have been the Duchess. As part of the renewed investigation, police cross-reference more than 500 missing women's cases nationally, in the process locating 263 women alive and well, and confirming 52 others had died of unrelated causes, but never identifying their own victim among them. Investigators have also examined, and ultimately ruled out, potential connections to 2 convicted serial killers, Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, and Peter Tobin, after reviewing rope-binding similarities and disposal methods, but neither man's known movements or later confirmed crimes lined up with the Cockley-Clee timeline. The woman found in that Norfolk field has never been identified. Her head has never been recovered. Her killer has never been found. 48-year-old Margaret Lightfoot, a dedicated Verves charity volunteer known for helping local pensioners, leaves her home on Connaught Avenue around noon, taking the family's Airedale Terrier puppy Tessa for their usual walk along Earl's Path into nearby Epping Forest. A 20-year-old garage receptionist cycling to work spots her entering the forest with the dog on a lead at around 1 o'clock. It's the last confirmed sighting of her alive. As the afternoon wears on, a neighbor notices Tessa wandering loose and without her lead in the street, and brings the dog home. When Margaret's husband, Roy, an architect, returns from work that evening and finds she still hasn't come home, he calls the police. Officers search for hours that night, joined by Roy and several neighbors, but the search is called off until morning when nothing turns up. At first light, a police dog locates Margaret's nude body hidden in thick undergrowth not far from her home. The evidence at the scene points to a brutal, opportunistic attack. Investigators believe Margaret was punched in the face, stripped, sexually assaulted, and strangled, using her own dog's leash as a ligature. Her clothing is found scattered around her body. Her Wellington boots are discovered underneath her. Detectives also learned that several local women had previously reported an indecent exposure incident at that exact spot in the woods, raising the possibility her killer had used the location before. Despite an intensive investigation at the time, no one is ever charged. The case has been periodically revisited by the Metropolitan Police's Cold Case Unit in the years since, most notably after Margaret's widower, Roy, by then 90 years old, saw a television segment on unsolved cases and personally called police to reopen renewed interest. Investigators have since focused specifically on Margaret's Wellington boots, theorizing that if her killer pulled them off her feet, they may retain trace DNA from skin cells left through contact. Though detectives have cautioned that how the boots were originally handled and fingerprinted back in 1975 may complicate any modern testing. As of the most recent reporting, the Metropolitan Police confirmed the case remains an active, ongoing investigation and have declined to release further case file details publicly while it stays open. If you're finding this series valuable, hit subscribe now. There's a lot more still to come. We'll be covering the 1980s soon in one of the next uploads, and you don't want to miss it. 48-year-old Ivy Davies runs the Orange Tree Cafe in Westcliff-on-Sea, a well-known and well-liked fixture in the local community. On this February morning, she fails to open up shop. She's found dead inside her home on Holland Road. The house has been ransacked. A ligature has been left around her neck, though it isn't what killed her. The actual murder weapon, a metal pry bar, is found near her body, and she's been battered to death with it. 2 men are questioned shortly after the murder on suspicion of carrying it out, but neither is ever charged. They remain the case's prime suspects for more than 3 decades, until 2006, when detectives arrest a third man, 68 years old and from Basildon, on suspicion of murder. He too is released without charge. Years later, Ivy's son comes forward publicly, pointing to a specific theory he believes deserves scrutiny: Patrick Mackay, a convicted serial killer active in England during that period. He describes striking similarities between his mother's murder and Mackay's known modus operandi, noting that whoever killed Ivy had undressed her, dressed her in a nightdress, positioned her on her injured side, and left the television running. Details he says mirror patterns associated with Mackay's other killings. He's careful to say he can't conclusively confirm Mackay was responsible, only that the method fits. Essex police have confirmed publicly that Ivy's case remains formally unsolved but not closed, and that it continues to be periodically reviewed. In a statement, the force acknowledged that while loyalties and circumstances change over the decades, what hasn't changed is the ongoing pain Ivy's family carries knowing her killer has never faced justice, and they've continued to appeal for anyone with information to come forward. No one has ever been convicted of murdering Ivy Davies. The prime suspects questioned in 1975 were never charged, a later suspect arrested in 2006 was released, and the theory connecting her death to a known serial killer has never been officially confirmed. 28-year-old Richard Cowden, a logging truck driver, his 22-year-old wife, Belinda, and their 2 children, 5-year-old David and 5-month-old Melissa, head out from their home in White City for a spur-of-the-moment Labor Day camping trip in the Siskiyou Mountains. They set up at a campground along Carberry Creek near Copper, a spot the family had visited before. On the morning of September 1st, Richard and David walk to the Copper General Store to pick up milk. Witnesses see them there and see them heading back toward the campsite afterward. It's the last confirmed sighting of any of them alive. That evening, the family is expected at Belinda's mother's house for dinner, less than a mile from the campground. When they don't show up, Belinda's mother drives out to check on them. She finds the campsite eerily intact but empty, the tent still standing, their vehicle still there, Belinda's purse still sitting on the picnic table, even the milk Richard had just bought left behind. There's no sign of a struggle, and no sign of the family anywhere. A massive search operation follows, involving local law enforcement, volunteers, and the National Guard, becoming one of the largest search efforts in Oregon's history. It turns up nothing. 7 months pass. Then, in April 1975, gold prospectors searching the remote wooded terrain, roughly 7 miles from the original campsite, make a horrifying discovery. Richard's skull is found tied to a tree with a leather strap near the entrance of a small cave. Inside the cave itself, hidden beneath rocks about 100 feet further in, are the remains of Belinda and both children, deliberately concealed. Investigators recover a single bullet at the scene, which becomes their strongest physical lead. It points them toward Dwayne Lee Little, a man who had been paroled from the Oregon State Penitentiary just months before the Cowdens disappeared, having previously served time for the 1964 rape and murder of 15-year-old Orla Faye Phipps. State police were able to place Little in the Copper area over that specific Labor Day weekend. Despite this, he was never charged in the Cowden case, and he has never confessed. One of the original Oregon State Police detectives who worked the case, Richard Davis, has spoken candidly in the decades since about the toll the unsolved case has taken, saying openly that the cases you never solve are the ones you never forget, and admitting the investigation wasn't handled as well as it could have been at the time. The Cowden family murders remain one of Oregon's most haunting unsolved cases. No one has ever been charged with killing Richard, Belinda, David, or Melissa Cowden. 51-year-old Esther Soper lives alone at 9 Trematon Terrace, a widow since the death of her husband Norman, who'd worked at Plymouth Dockyard. She and Norman had been long devoted members of the Exclusive Brethren, the strictest branch of the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, a faith that shapes nearly every part of Esther's world. She doesn't socialize outside the church community, hasn't spoken to her own father in 15 years following his remarriage, and keeps even minimal contact with her daughter, who lives nearby. On New Year's Day, Esther spends what will become the last day of her life at home, preparing the house for a scheduled viewing by a prospective buyer. When she fails to show up for a church meeting later that day, 2 fellow members of her congregation grow concerned and go to check on her. They find her body in the hallway of her home around 9 that evening. She's been beaten to death, with a cider bottle and a pair of stockings both recovered at the scene as apparent weapons. Devon and Cornwall police launch a major investigation, dedicating around 80 officers to an inquiry that runs for roughly 7 months. And here's what makes Esther Soper's case genuinely strange among cases like it. Despite that scale of investigation, no one is ever formally questioned as a suspect. No arrests, no charges. One name does surface in the investigation, a man using the identity Clifford Sparks, connected to that scheduled house viewing shortly before her death, but detectives were never able to trace him or confirm his real identity. In 1997, the case is reopened for a DNA review as forensic science advances, but the effort produces no new developments or leads. Today, Esther Soper's murder holds a specific, sobering distinction. It's recognized as the oldest unsolved murder case in the southwest of England. 15-year-old best friends Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson, both students at Ball High School, are last seen together outside a Galveston ice cream store. Both girls are well known locally as regulars at the island's ski school, part of a tight-knit surf and ski crowd. They tell their parents they plan to hitchhike to Houston together that day. They never arrive. 2 days later, on November 17th, their bodies are found in Turner's Bayou, just outside Texas City. They've been bound, partially undressed, raped, and shot, their bodies left submerged in the water. The murders send shockwaves through Galveston and Houston, making front-page news across the state. Investigators at the time wonder whether they're looking for someone deliberately targeting girls in pairs, a theory that gains disturbing weight a few months later, when the remains of 2 more friends, Sharon Shaw and Rhonda Johnson, are discovered in a separate marsh only a few miles away, having disappeared from the same island that same summer. Despite an intensive investigation, leads are scarce and the case goes cold. Decades later, in the late 1990s, a convicted killer named Edward Harold Bell, already imprisoned for the 1978 murder of a man in Pasadena, Texas, sends a letter to the Galveston district attorney confessing to killing Debbie and Maria, writing that he'd been brainwashed into it. Bell goes on to claim responsibility for 11 murders total across the region, referring to his victims as the 11 who went to heaven. His letters accurately describe specific details of the crime scene and location that investigators find credible. Prosecutors, however, never act on the confession, and it has never been treated as an official resolution to the case. Bell later recanted some of his claims at various points, adding further uncertainty. He died in prison of natural causes in April 2019, having never been formally charged in Debbie and Maria's deaths. Their case remains connected in the public imagination to a broader, still unresolved pattern along the I-45 corridor south of Houston, an area that's come to be known as the Texas Killing Fields, where more than 30 women and girls have disappeared or been found murdered since the 1970s. Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson's murders remain officially unsolved. The friends who grew up alongside them are still waiting for an answer neither the confession nor the decades since have ever definitively provided. 13-year-old Colette Anise Wilson, one of 10 children in the Wilson family and an active member of her school band, attends a morning band camp session. Afterward, her band director drops her off at the intersection of County Road 99 and Highway 6 in Alvin, a routine spot where her mother, Claire, is set to pick her up. When Claire arrives, Colette is gone. Her family immediately senses something is deeply wrong, and they push back hard against an early theory floated by investigators that she might have simply run away. Those closest to Colette insist she would never have left without telling anyone. For 4 months, there's no answer. Then, in November 1971, her remains are discovered near Addicks Reservoir in West Houston, roughly 35 to 40 miles from where she'd last been seen. She'd been shot in the head. Her band instrument, which she'd had with her that day, is never recovered. What makes the discovery even more disturbing is where, specifically, she's found. Her remains lie just 35 yards from the spot where the body of 19-year-old Gloria Gonzalez, who'd vanished from Houston that October, is located only months later. The proximity leads investigators to connect the two cases, and eventually to a much larger pattern. Colette's murder becomes one of 11 cases a Galveston area convicted killer, Edward Harold Bell, later claims responsibility for from his prison cell, referring to his alleged victims collectively as the 11 who went to heaven. Bell's letters to prosecutors, sent in 1998, but not made public for over a decade, describe details investigators found difficult to dismiss. Separately, Brazoria County Sheriff's officials had long floated another theory entirely, that Wilson and another victim may have been killed by a different man, a convict who was himself killed during a 1972 jail escape. Neither theory has ever been proven, and no one has ever been formally charged with Colette's murder. Her case remains tied to the broader mystery surrounding the stretch of Interstate 45 running from Houston to Galveston, an area that's become known as the Texas Killing Fields, where dozens of women and girls have been murdered or vanished since the early 1970s, many of their cases still unsolved to this day. 12-year-old Kelly Albright lives with her mother, Roberta, and stepfather, Richard LaSure, on East 10th Street in Hutchinson. On this particular night, her parents are away visiting relatives, leaving Kelly at home sharing a bedroom with her siblings. Around 10:30 p.m., Kelly briefly wakes her older brother to tell him she's going to the bathroom. He falls back asleep. When their parents return home around 12:15 a.m., Kelly is gone. There's no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house, leaving investigators without any clear answer for how someone could have taken a child from inside her own home in the middle of the night without waking anyone else. 4 days later, a farmer working a sorghum field east of Hutchinson finds Kelly's body. She'd been sexually assaulted and stabbed 18 times with a blade roughly 5 inches long. Investigators recover almost nothing at either the crime scene or the house, just a pillowcase and her pajamas. The case draws early suspicion toward a family friend of the Albrights, a man named Glenn Davis. A neighbor recalls seeing Davis's car parked near the Albright home on the night Kelly disappeared, and separately recalls seeing him thoroughly cleaning that same vehicle the following day. Despite this, Davis is never charged. Decades pass. In 1995, Davis is convicted of an unrelated sex crime in neighboring Sedgwick County and sentenced to prison. In 1997, Reno County investigators, believing they might finally be able to secure a confession from him regarding Kelly's murder, attempt to press him while he's incarcerated. Before that effort produces a confession or formal charge, Davis dies of heart failure in 1997, taking whatever he knew with him. The case doesn't end there. Independent researchers and family members, including relatives who've spent years combing through old case files, have pointed to an entirely different suspect, a close relative of Kelly's, someone who still lived in Reno County decades later. Those who've investigated this angle cite the relative's documented history of violent and erratic behavior, along with letters exchanged between family members that they believe raise serious questions. This theory has never been formally confirmed or pursued to a resolution by law enforcement. No one has ever been charged with Kelly Lynn Albright's murder. The most likely suspect died before he could be confronted, and a second, unresolved theory about someone even closer to Kelly has never been publicly closed. 22-year-old Carrie Mae Hardy is last seen in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood in June 1972. Her mother, Sheila, reports her missing to Seattle police shortly after. From there, Carrie simply disappears, and for nearly 40 years, no one knows what happened to her. In September 2010, a backhoe operator digging a waterline ditch near the Suncadia Resort Golf Course in Ronald, Washington, in rural Kittitas County, uncovers human remains buried in a shallow grave. Found alongside the bones are a gold wedding band and scraps of blue clothing material. A forensic facial reconstruction is created from the remains, and Carrie's family recognizes an unmistakable resemblance. A DNA sample, originally collected from the family back in 2004 as part of an unrelated Green River killer investigation, is compared against the remains. In June 2011, Kittitas County confirms the match. The woman found at the golf course is Carrie Mae Hardy. Her identification reopens a nearly 40-year-old mystery, and almost immediately, local media and investigators raise the possibility that she may have been an early victim of Ted Bundy, whose earliest confirmed Seattle area attacks began around this same period. The timing lines up, and her remains were found roughly 5 miles from a location Bundy is known to have used to dispose of other victims. Investigators note, however, that Carrie doesn't closely match Bundy's typical victim profile. She had red hair and was notably tall, physical traits that don't align with most of his confirmed victims. Bundy, executed in 1989, never mentioned her in any of his confessions. A connection to Gary Ridgway, the Green River killer, has also been raised, though Ridgway has never spoken publicly about her either, and investigators have stated there's no confirmed link. Carrie's own family has pointed investigators toward a very different theory entirely, one closer to home. Relatives have described her marriage as turbulent, and her brother has suggested he doesn't believe her husband, John, intended to kill her, but rather that a violent altercation may have escalated further than intended. Family members also noted that Carrie's father owned rural land near Ellensburg at the time, not far from where her remains were ultimately found, raising questions about whether that connection played a role in where her body ended up. Investigators found this family theory intriguing, but the marital tension, aggressive personality, and geographic proximity were never enough to constitute proof, and no charges were ever filed against anyone. Carrie's mother, Sheila, told reporters in 2011 she was overjoyed simply to have her daughter found, saying she didn't personally believe Bundy was responsible, and that she cared less about who did it than about her daughter finally coming home. Sheila passed away in 2015, never learning for certain who killed her daughter. More than 5 decades after Carrie Mae Hardy disappeared from Capitol Hill, her murder remains formally unsolved. Neither the serial killer theories nor her own family's suspicions have ever been confirmed. 11-year-old Wanda Wakowicz, known around her working-class Rochester neighborhood as a quiet, responsible child who helped care for her younger siblings, is sent to the Hillside Delicatessen on Avenue D to pick up groceries for her mother, Joyce, a widow. The clerk on duty, Bill Van Orden, rings up her purchase around 5:15 p.m. Wanda leaves the store carrying a heavy bag and starts walking north on Conkey Avenue, just 3 blocks from home. She doesn't make it. Neighborhood residents later recall seeing her struggling with the weight of the groceries along the way. 3 of her own classmates specifically remember watching her brace the bag against a fence to get a better grip, just as a brown vehicle pulled up nearby. When Wanda doesn't arrive home, her mother reports her missing at 8 that evening. What follows is an unusually large, immediate response. Nearly 50 detectives fan out across several square miles surrounding her home, the delicatessen, and the areas along the Genesee River where Wanda was known to play. The search continues through the night and comes up empty. Joyce Walkowitz, already living with the trauma of raising her children alone, is hospitalized twice for emotional distress during the ordeal. The next morning, a New York State trooper on routine patrol finds her fully clothed body at a rest area off Route 104 in Webster, roughly 7 miles from where she'd last been seen, lying face down in the grass at the bottom of a hillside embankment. Because Wanda's case followed so closely on the heels of Carmen Colon's murder a year and a half earlier, a sheriff's sergeant originally assigned to Colon's largely inactive case is formally reassigned to a new task force built specifically around finding Wanda's killer, even as the Rochester Police Department publicly downplayed any connection between the two cases. That September, local station Walker announces plans for an unusual investigative move, a 30-minute televised reconstruction of Wanda's abduction and the discovery of her body, broadcast on October 21st alongside public appeals for information. The response is significant. Over 200 calls come in from viewers. None of them produce a usable lead. Today, New York State Police confirm that DNA evidence from Wanda's case has survived and continues to be tested against modern databases, something investigators note isn't true for all 3 girls' cases. Evidence in at least one of the other cases was destroyed before modern genetic testing existed. As State Police investigator George Gerbic put it in a recent interview, they believe they're now one swab away from finally identifying her killer. Wanda Walkowitz's murder is still unsolved decades after a brown car pulled up beside a girl struggling to carry her groceries home. But unlike so many cases from this era, hers may still be one modern science actually resolves. Just before 4:30 in the morning, gunfire erupts inside a red brick house on Hazelwood Street, on Detroit's west side, not far from the intersection at the heart of the 1967 Detroit riot. Neighbors, jolted awake, call police to report the shots. A separate call comes in from a woman who says she's just found her husband shot inside the house and is driving him herself to Henry Ford Hospital. When officers arrive, they find a scene unlike anything the city has seen before. 8 people are lying in the living room, shot execution style. 7 of them are already dead. It becomes, and remains today, the largest mass murder in Detroit's history and the deadliest single shooting the state of Michigan has ever recorded. All 8 victims are Black Detroiters in their 20s. Investigators quickly zero in on a theory. Robert Gardner, the man who survived just long enough to be taken to the hospital before dying of his wounds, was known to police as a heroin dealer and pimp with enemies stretching well beyond Detroit. Detectives come to believe he was the actual target that night, and that everyone else in that living room was killed simply because they were present, potential witnesses who couldn't be left behind. The theory investigators settle on involves a robbery gone wrong the other way around. Months earlier, in March 1971, Gardner is believed to have robbed 2 drug dealers visiting Detroit from Toronto. Police theorize the Toronto dealers responded by putting out a hit on Gardner in revenge, and that whoever carried it out walked into that house prepared to leave no one alive to identify them. The investigation runs into serious obstacles almost immediately. Physical evidence at the scene is limited, and witnesses connected to the narcotics underworld surrounding Gardner are reluctant to talk to police, unwilling to risk becoming the next target themselves. By the mid-1970s, with no arrests, no indictments, and the trail effectively gone cold, the case is treated as a cold case. It's revisited periodically by Detroit investigators in the decades since, but the same problem keeps resurfacing. 50-year-old ballistic and scene evidence has degraded to the point where modern forensic review offers limited hope of a breakthrough, even with today's technology. As of the most recent reporting, Detroit authorities still list the Hazelwood Massacre among the city's enduring unsolved homicides, the largest mass killing in Detroit's history by victim count, still built entirely on an unproven theory of drug world retaliation, and still without a single person ever charged. 8-year-old Deborah Debbie Makel, a giggly, brown-haired third grader who loved to dance, rides the school bus home from Dry Tavern Elementary School on a warm Friday afternoon, getting off less than 2 miles from home at a stop on Ferncliff Road. From there, it's a short walk to the McKell family home at the end of Hoy Street, a dead-end road in the tiny Greene County town of fewer than 500 people. Her older brothers, Dwayne Jr. and Vaughn, don't ride the bus that day. They'd been given permission to walk home so they could sell magazines for a school fundraiser. Their parents, Charlotte and Dwayne, are both at work, Dwayne teaching at a nearby high school and Charlotte working at a local sewing factory, so it's routine for the kids to arrive home to an empty house before their parents get back. When the boys arrive home, they find Debbie's coat, her school books, and her house key sitting on the kitchen table. But Debbie herself isn't there. At the time, this doesn't immediately alarm anyone, as one retired state trooper who lived across the street from the Makels later explained, in a small, close-knit town like Reese's Landing in 1973, it was simply assumed she'd wandered off to play with a neighborhood friend. That assumption turns out to be tragically wrong. 2 days later, Debbie's body is discovered in a shallow grave near an old distillery foundation, less than 200 yards from her own home, close to Pumpkin Run Creek. She'd been sexually assaulted and murdered. Investigators interview more than 1,000 people in the course of the investigation, but are never able to settle on a primary suspect. A handful of names remain on an informal list of possibilities for decades, but none is ever considered solid enough to bring charges. In 2003, cold case detectives send evidence recovered from the scene to a police laboratory where a DNA profile is successfully extracted from crime scene material. That profile is entered into a national database. As of the most recent reporting, it has never produced a match. Debbie's parents, Charlotte and Dwayne, continued living in the very same home for decades afterward, just a short walk from where their daughter's body was found. Charlotte has spoken publicly about the toll the unresolved case has taken, describing years of feeling unsafe, fearing for her son's safety, and lying awake some nights even decades later, still searching for answers that never came. Investigators continue to hold out hope that the DNA profile recovered in 2003 will eventually find its match. 10-year-old Carmen Colon is living with her grandparents when, around 4:30 in the afternoon, she's sent to the local pharmacy to pick up a prescription for her grandfather. It's a walk of just a block and a half. She never returns. What makes her case especially haunting isn't just her disappearance, it's what happened afterward, largely unknown to the public for years. As Carmen was being attacked, several motorists driving past reportedly saw a young girl, half naked, apparently trying to escape along the roadside. Not one of them stopped. When police later asked why, the explanations were strikingly similar. They said they'd been going too fast or were in a hurry to get home. Rochester Police Captain Sparacino later summed up the department's disbelief bluntly. "Would you believe it? Nobody stopped. People told us they were going too fast. They were in a hurry to get home." 2 days after Carmen vanished, 2 teenagers on bicycles find her body near the Rochester suburb of Chile. Her coat is discovered separately, roughly 300 feet away in a culvert. Her pants aren't recovered until nearly 2 weeks later, found near a service road off Interstate 490. The autopsy reveals extensive fingernail scratch marks covering her body, a fractured skull and vertebra, signs of sexual assault, and manual strangulation as the cause of death. In early 1972, a local advertising company donates space for 5 massive billboards along Rochester's expressways, each one 30 feet by 12 feet, bearing an 8-foot-high photo of Carmen beneath the words, "Do you know who killed Carmen Colon?" A $6,000 reward is attached. Despite the scale of the public campaign, the case produces no arrest, and by December, the number of detectives assigned full-time has already dropped to 3. It's this unsolved case, its billboard still fresh in the public's memory 17 months later, that Rochester was living under when a second girl, Wanda Walkowicz, vanished, effectively launching the broader investigation that would come to be known as the Alphabet Murders. Carmen's own case has taken several more turns since. In 2009, investigators exhumed the remains of a city firefighter suspected of being a serial rapist, comparing his DNA against evidence from the crime scene. No match. DNA was recovered from the scene, but investigators have stated it was insufficient to generate a usable profile at all, a distinction that separates Carmen's case from Wanda Walkowitz's, where a full profile does exist. 56-year-old Athalia Poncel Lindsley is a striking figure in St. Augustine, a former Broadway dancer, model, television personality, and outspoken political activist. once rumored to have been engaged to Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. before his death in World War II. By 1974, she's become a fixture at county commissioner meetings, where she's been repeatedly critical of the county engineer, Alan Griffin Stanford Jr., accusing him, among other things, of lacking proper certification for his job. The two have been locked in an increasingly public feud, one that began with complaints about the 6 rescue dogs Athalia kept in her home. Around 5 in the evening on January 23rd, Athalia is attacked on the front steps of her home at 124 Marine Street. An 18-year-old neighbor, hearing the commotion, looks over and sees a man striking her. He runs to tell his mother, shouting, "Mr. Stanford is hitting Mrs. Poncell." He later tells the same account to a local newspaper editor. That detail never made it into the official police report. Athalia is struck at least 9 times with a machete. One of her fingers is severed. She's nearly decapitated. The only thing missing from her home afterward is a pet blue jay, its cage found smashed. Police quickly focus on Stanford, recovering a bloody shirt and a rusted machete, and charge him with murder. But at trial, the defense mounts an aggressive campaign, suggesting investigators had mishandled or even planted evidence, and getting the young eyewitness to walk back his identification, saying he could no longer be certain who he'd seen. The defense also leans heavily on portraying Athalia herself as a strange, difficult woman, implying she may have made other enemies. It works. Stanford is acquitted. The St. Augustine police chief at the time, Virgil Stewart, later admits publicly, "The trail is cold. I doubt we'll ever catch the killer." Then, later that same year, the case takes a darker turn. Frances Bemis, Athalia's close friend and neighbor on Marine Street, had reportedly been telling people she possessed information relevant to the case and may have been gathering material for a book about it. On November 3, 1974, Bemis goes out for her usual evening walk. She never returns. Her body is found the next day in a vacant lot a block and a half from her home, her skull crushed by a cement block. Neither murder has ever been solved. No DNA testing has ever been possible on the physical evidence from Athalia's case. The blood-stained shirt and machete were either discarded or improperly preserved over the decades, leaving nothing modern forensics could test. Both Athalia Poncell Lindsley and Frances Bemis remain officially unsolved homicides, their deaths still tied together by a silence that has never been broken. Frances Bemis lives on Marine Street in St. Augustine, where she's built a life around civic involvement, doing charitable work for various local causes, working as a publicist for the city, and writing for several local newspapers. She's well known and well liked in the community, the kind of person plugged into the social and political fabric of the town. 10 months earlier, her close friend and neighbor, Athalia Poncell Lindsley, had been hacked to death with a machete on her own front porch in broad daylight. A neighbor was tried for the killing and acquitted, and the case had gone cold, leaving the St. Augustine community shaken and largely without answers. In the months that follow, rumors begin circulating that Frances knows something. She's said to have alluded, to people close to her, that she possesses information relevant to who really killed Athalia, and there's talk she may have been quietly gathering material for a book about the case. Publicly, though, Frances projects calm. She tells people St. Augustine is the safest place she's ever lived, that she trusts her neighbors, and that she has no intention of changing her routine, including her nightly walks, a habit she'd kept up even on the night of Athalia's murder itself. On the evening of November 3rd, 1974, Frances heads out for her regular evening walk. She doesn't come home. Her body is found around 7 that evening, roughly a block and a half from her house. Her skull has been crushed with a cement block. No one is ever charged. Investigators are left with a killing that, on its face, looks disturbingly similar in circumstance to Athalia's. A woman attacked near her own home in a small, tight-knit community with no resolution ever reached. Whether Frances's death was actually connected to what she may have known about Athalia's murder has never been established. It's a question that's persisted in St. Augustine for decades, discussed in books, podcasts, and local retrospectives on the case, but it has never moved beyond speculation into anything police have officially confirmed. Frances Bemis's murder remains unsolved years and years later, filed alongside her friends as one of 2 killings on the same short stretch of Marine Street that St. Augustine has never been able to explain. 45-year-old Betty Van Patter, a twice-divorced mother of 3, works as the bookkeeper for the Black Panther Party, hired earlier that year through a connection to Ramparts magazine editor David Horowitz, who'd been collaborating with the party on various projects. An idealistic supporter of the Panthers and their community programs, Betty had spent months auditing the party's finances at its Oakland Community Learning Center. What she found troubled her deeply: financial irregularities and what she believed was the misuse of cash by party members. She warns Elaine Brown, who's leading the party while co-founder Huey Newton remains in exile in Cuba, that these practices are illegal and risk drawing dangerous attention from law enforcement. On the afternoon of December 13th, Brown fires her. That evening, Betty sits alone at a Berkeley bar called the Berkeley Square, nursing a drink, visibly upset. While she's there, a man walks in, hands her a note, and she gets up and follows him out the door. Later that night, she's spotted at Jimmy's Lamp Post, a bar on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland known as a Black Panther hangout, owned by a cousin of Huey Newton's. Meanwhile, back at the Berkeley Square, an ex-boyfriend named Ken Baptiste arrives to meet her and finds she's already gone. He calls the lamppost to ask if she's there. The response he gets back is the last message anyone connected to Betty Van Patter ever receives. She's never seen alive again. More than a month later, on January 17, 1975, her severely beaten body washes ashore in San Francisco Bay, evidence indicating she'd been raped and killed by blunt force trauma to the head. Despite the timeline, the witnesses, and widespread belief within journalism and law enforcement circles that the Black Panther Party's leadership was responsible, police were never able to gather sufficient evidence to charge anyone. Journalist Christopher Hitchens later wrote bluntly in the Los Angeles Times that there was no doubt of the Panther leadership's complicity in the crime, but suspicion, however widespread, was never enough to secure an indictment. David Weir, the investigative journalist and co-founder of the Center for Investigative Reporting, who has covered the case for decades, has written that the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, the Berkeley Police Department, multiple private investigators, and numerous journalists have all looked into Betty's murder over the years and come up empty. Her death remains, as one Bay Area outlet put it, a dark cloud still hanging over the legacy of an organization otherwise remembered for its community programs, a case where nearly everyone believes they know who's responsible, and no one has ever been able to prove it. 37-year-old Donald Goines has, in just 3 short years, become one of the most widely read Black authors in America. Not through literary establishment channels, but through word of mouth in Detroit living rooms, where his novels sit prominently on coffee tables and bookshelves. Born in 1936 to a middle-class Catholic family that ran a Detroit laundry business, Goines lied about his age to enlist in the Air Force at just 15, served during the Korean War, and returned home with a heroin addiction that would shape the rest of his life, leading him in and out of prison and eventually toward crime. It's in prison that Goines discovers writing, inspired by Robert Maupin's memoir Pimp. Published under the pen name Iceberg Slim, Goines channels his own experience with addiction, hustling, and street life into fiction, publishing his first novel, Dope Fiend, in 1971. 15 more books follow over the next 3 years, including Street Players, Daddy Cool, and Kenyatta's last hit, raw, unflinching portraits of the same streets he'd once lived on. His influence would eventually reach far beyond Detroit. Decades later, Tupac Shakur would credit Goines directly, once saying, "Machiavelli was my tutor, Donald Goines my father figure." On October 21, 1974, Goines and his common-law wife, Shirley Saylor, the mother of his 2 young children, are found shot to death in their Highland Park flat. Each has been shot 5 times. Their 2 children, ages 2 and 4, are home at the time of the killing. No one is ever arrested. Theories multiply in the years that follow. Some point to Goines' ongoing heroin addiction and potential unpaid debts, others to the possibility that the real-life hustlers, pimps, and dealers he'd based his fiction on felt exposed or embarrassed by how closely his characters mirrored actual people on Detroit's streets. None of the theories have ever produced a suspect. Shirley and Donald's daughter, Donna Saylor, was only 2 years old when her parents were killed and has no memory of the shooting or of them at all, piecing together who they were only through the recollections of family friends who described her mother as a sweetheart with a great smile and her father simply as a nice guy. Their children, now adults, are still hoping the renewed investigation finally brings them an answer neither has ever had. 65-year-old Leon Jordan is, by 1970, widely regarded as the most powerful black politician in the state of Missouri. His life reads like a study in reinvention. A Wilberforce University graduate, a school teacher, and in 1938, one of the first African Americans to join the Kansas City Police Department, where he'd eventually become the department's first black lieutenant. In the late 1940s, he spent 8 years in Liberia, reorganizing the country's 450-man police force before returning home to Kansas City and entering politics. In 1964, Jordan is elected to the Missouri House of Representatives, and he co-founds Freedom, Inc., a political organization that becomes central to consolidating black political power across Kansas City. He's campaigning for his 4th term in office when, shortly before his death, he describes himself publicly as a radical, adding, "I'm not a conformist, but there are bounds of reason." Jordan also owns and operates the Green Duck Tavern. Around 1 in the morning on July 15, 1970, as he's closing up the bar for the night, he's shot at close range with 3 shotgun blasts in what investigators immediately recognize as a gangland-style execution. Eyewitnesses described 3 black men fleeing the scene. The shotgun used in the killing, a stolen Remington 12 gauge, is abandoned nearby. It's later traced back to a burglary from a hardware store in Independence, Missouri, 5 years earlier. 3 men are eventually arrested in connection with the murder, including at least 1 individual affiliated with a local criminal organization known as the Black Mafia. 1 suspect is acquitted at trial. Charges against the other 2 are dropped entirely. No one is ever convicted. Investigators at the time and in later years point to a specific motive rooted in Kansas City's political landscape. Jordan and his Freedom, Inc. movement had been openly opposed to the North End political faction, a group with reported ties to La Cosa Nostra that had historically controlled black voting blocks in the city. Years before his murder, Jordan had physically punched a fellow state legislator he believed was supporting mob-connected interests in Jefferson City, and death threats against Jordan followed in the aftermath. In 2010, Kansas City's Cold Case Unit formally reopened the investigation after decades of dormancy. A subsequent 900-page police report, completed in 2011, concluded that Kansas City mob boss Nicholas Civella had personally given his blessing to Jordan's assassination. Despite this conclusion, no indictments were ever issued. By that point, every individual believed to have been involved was already deceased. Jordan's widow, Orchid Jordan, succeeded him in his Missouri House seat, going on to serve for the next 14 years, from 1970 to 1984. The Leon M. Jordan Memorial Park, dedicated in 1975, still stands in Kansas City today. At the height of the Troubles, 10-year-old Brian McDermott, the youngest of 5 children, leaves his family home on Wells Street in the lower Woodstock Road area of East Belfast around 12:30 in the afternoon. He heads to nearby Ormeau Park to play, telling his parents he'll be back by 2:30 for Sunday dinner. He's last seen playing alone in the park's playground sometime between 1 and 3 that afternoon. He doesn't come home. When Brian fails to return for dinner, his worried parents contact police, who search the surrounding area, combing woodland and derelict buildings near the family home. Almost a week later, police lower the level of the River Lagan near the Belfast Boat Club and recover a sack containing Brian's remains. He had been mutilated and burned. Police at the time also drained the river above its tidal weir, hoping to locate additional remains that were never found. What follows is described as the largest manhunt Northern Ireland had seen up to that point. It produces no arrest. Given the era, initial theories lean toward a sectarian motive, consistent with the broader violence gripping Belfast at the time. But the investigation takes a disturbing turn in the years that follow. Brian's older brother, William, 16 at the time of the murder, becomes a suspect and is formally questioned by police in 1976 and again in 2004. During the 1976 questioning, William gives a confession, one he has always maintained was coerced. He's never charged. William later changes his name by deed poll to escape the stigma of being publicly suspected in his younger brother's death, a stigma that leaves him estranged from the rest of his family. Speaking to the BBC in 2013, he acknowledged he remains widely seen as the case's chief suspect, saying, "My family has to live with the fact that Brian was murdered. I have to live with the fact that I was accused of doing it. A separate family member, Brian's other older brother Eddie, has offered his own competing theory, suggesting the true circumstances may have involved a different sibling and stemmed from a moment of jealousy and an argument the night before Brian disappeared, a theory that has never been confirmed either. The case took on an even more troubling dimension in 1982, when declassified government files later revealed that Northern Ireland's Attorney General privately told colleagues that police were re-examining possible links between Brian's murder and the Kincora boys' home abuse scandal, suggesting investigators had come to believe the case might have homosexual aspects rather than a purely sectarian motive, information that reportedly conflicted with what police had previously told government ministers. In 2025, more than 50 years after Brian's disappearance, Northern Ireland's Legacy Investigation Branch issued a renewed public appeal, acknowledging the case has never been closed and that someone who stayed silent decades ago may now be willing to come forward. No one has ever been convicted of murdering Brian McDermott. 37-year-old Jean McConville, a widow raising 10 children alone in a flat in the Divis Flats complex in West Belfast, is taken from her home by the IRA in December 1972, seized in front of her own children. The IRA had branded her a British spy and informer, an accusation her family has always denied. She is never seen alive again. Her 10 children, suddenly orphaned, are separated and placed into care. Jean McConville becomes one of the disappeared, a group of roughly 17 people abducted, murdered, and secretly buried by the IRA during the Troubles, their remains deliberately hidden so their fates could never be confirmed. For decades, her family has no answers and no body to bury. The IRA doesn't publicly admit to killing her until 1998 as part of the peace process, when it acknowledges responsibility for 9 of the disappeared's deaths. In 2003, a walker discovers human remains on Templetown Beach in County Louth. They're confirmed to be Jean McConville's. What sets her case apart from virtually every other unsolved killing of the era is a remarkable piece of historical documentation, the Boston College Oral History Project, known as the Belfast Project, in which former IRA and Loyalist paramilitaries gave candid, recorded confessional interviews on the explicit understanding they wouldn't be released until after their deaths. Among those interviewed were IRA veterans Brendan Hughes and Dolores Price, both of whom implicated Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams in ordering McConville's abduction and killing. A third figure, referred to as Interviewee Z, and alleged to be senior IRA figure Ivor Bell, claimed on tape that Adams was present at a December 1972 meeting where McConville's fate was discussed. Northern Ireland police fought a lengthy transatlantic legal battle to obtain the tapes, ultimately succeeding. In 2014, Gerry Adams was arrested and questioned for 4 days in connection with the case. He was released without charge, consistently and firmly denying any involvement, stating publicly, "I did not have any involvement in the abduction, killing, and the burial of Jean McConville." A prior 2006 official investigation had already dismissed the allegations against him. Ivor Bell was separately charged with soliciting McConville's murder, based on the Boston College material. He was found unfit to stand trial on health grounds, and the case proceeded as a trial of the facts rather than a criminal trial. The presiding judge ultimately ruled the Boston College tapes themselves were unreliable and inadmissible as evidence. To this day, Adams maintains he was not a member of the IRA at all, a claim disputed by many, including several of the former paramilitaries interviewed for the Belfast Project. No one has ever been convicted of John McConville's murder. John McConville's case remains one of nearly 3,300 unsolved killings from the Troubles, but unlike almost any other, hers comes with hours of recorded testimony from the people who may have known exactly what happened, and still, formally, no answer at all. That's 47 murders. Some of you knew 1 or 2 before this video. Most of these never made it past a local newspaper at the time, and that's really the point of putting them together like this. Cases don't stay open because they're unsolvable. A lot of them stayed open because nobody outside the immediate family kept asking. Somewhere behind every one of these files is a person who's still waiting. A sister who spent 40 years being quietly suspected. A father who still lives a 10-minute walk from the field where his daughter was found. If you want to see any of these followed further, say so in the comments. That's genuinely how we decide what to dig into next. Subscribe if you want to be here for it.